wheel back on, which is this one, I kind of want to talk about some of the ideas behind wheels and tires and your options out there. The gray wheel is a modern Alfaholics GTA replica wheel that is a 15x7. This one is an original magnesium 14x7. And as you can see, they're very different in how the stance is, and that's really just because it's the tire sidewall profile. This is a reproduction tire that Goodyear makes, and they still make it in Canton, Ohio. And this tire is 26 inches tall. That tire is almost 23 inches tall. So by mere fact alone of the tire height, the car's going to get lower with that as it would with this. That is actually a wider footprint on it versus this by almost an inch. When you're dealing with wheel arch issues like you do on the earlier GTVs, that sidewall profile, that tire becomes a very big challenge to deal with. You can potentially rub the inner fender, slice your tire, and blow it. The older vintage style tires have this bowing effect to it, and this provides you a little bit more wheel clearance, or wheel arch clearance I should say. Anyway, something to note. Think about whether you want to go to a 15-inch wheel. Yeah, it has a slightly more modern look to it, but a lot of that has to do with the tire you put on it. But the thing of it is 15-inch tires are far more abundant in a variety of compounds and grips and looks than there are in the 14-inch tires. There's not that many out there. There's even fewer out there of a sportier feel, and even fewer of those that are affordable. These Goodyear tires, wow, they're about 250 bucks a piece by the time you get them to your doorstep. So yeah, you can easily spend $1,000 on tires just in that alone. Whereas the 15.7, that is a really inexpensive but a very good tire on there. That is a Folk and a Xena. The Folk and the Xenas are, you know, it's something that I believe is now discontinued, but you can still buy them brand new on places like eBay. And I've seen them go for as little as 60 bucks a piece on eBay on a buy it now price. But something to note about this, on a modern tire, you have really good cutaway profiles. And this particular tire, you know, because we live in the Northwest, has excellent water treading ability. The larger vanes compress the water and it gives it plenty of areas to evacuate to minimize the hydroplaning effect. Our cars don't weigh that much in the first place. The wider you make that tire, the more buoyant your car becomes. So it's something to think about. Wider is cool looking, but if you live in a high water environment like we do here in the Northwest, you want to think about how well does that tire tread water. But anyway, the 15-inch wheels, you have a wider variety of tires out there. They tend to be cheaper, and you have better selection in compounds. So you can really find a good tire that suits your needs. Whereas in the 14s, minimal options, minimal looks, and they tend to be a far, far more expensive tire. Okay, last week we changed out the limited slip on my car, and I also changed out the rear springs for a package that I kind of thought was probably going to be ideal. Turned out that it wasn't. Based off what you have in the front springs, you should also have consideration to the rear springs. Now there is a whole lot of information out there as to what is right for your car. What is right for your car is a personal preference. There are people who have definitive statements that feel that their concepts are ideal. Well, their concepts are probably ideal for them, not necessarily you. I want you to think about, if you're going for a very sporty package, you don't have to settle for a really rigid spring and shock combo kit. There are much more forgiving scenarios out there, and you can do your homework and figure out where those are at. But today what we're talking about is changing out the springs on my car. As you probably see, I have a set of yellows in here along with my Coney reds. Now, I'm not a big fan of how these yellows are sitting up on my car. They kind of compress a little too easy. They're just a little too soft. A soft spring's not a bad thing, but in this car, because I have 26-inch tall tire. I have a very ballooned vintage tire on my car. I don't need the springs to be exceptionally soft. A softer spring is more ideal in a car that has a lower profile tire, and there's a lot of formulas out there that affect all this. Anyway, so I'm changing these springs out for something that's slightly taller and a little stiffer. Okay, now if you've never changed the springs out in your car, you're going to run into one small problem. The limiting strap, and these are the original limiting straps to my car, they've never been changed out. Mine aren't dry rotted, they're not brittle in any capacity, they still work. Why change them? Anyway, getting the limiting straps off in most cases is going to be a little bit of a nightmare, because the two screws that go through the aluminum block, through the limiting straps, into the stud housing above, that's usually quite well seized. And if you were to look inside the housing, which is right here, you're going to see a little sleeve pushing up through the housing. That's where the threads of the bolt are going through to a bizarre little capture nut, if you will. I would suggest that you soak the heck out of those with some penetrant several days beforehand, and make sure your screwdriver, when you put it in, has a good bite, no slop to it. If it has any slop, you're never ever going to get those things out. You're going to end up having to cut them off. If you have only a few screwdrivers in your tool chest, double check and see if you got something that's A, going to be long enough, and B, that has a right size tip to fit in there. Now, a number 3 tip from Snap-on is different than a number 3 tip from Craftsman or Husky or whatever your tool is. My point is this: if it has any slop to it, if it's a wore-out screwdriver, don't use it at this point, because you're going to round out that screw and you're never going to get it out, and then you're going to have to cut it off. If you have to cut it off, that is never going to be fun. Odds are you're going to end up having to cut your limiting straps off too. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and drop ours out. Now, I'm lucky, mine came out really easy. So taking them out now is going to be just as easy as a job. But what we have here is we have a little bottle jack. By the way, a lot of people cut the dust backer off. There's really no reason why you have to leave them on there. I leave mine on there because several years ago I was exercising a TR6 that I had, and the dust covers were off of it. And I don't know what it was that I hit, but something hit the inside of my rotor and warped it instantly. I had a big nasty ding in it, and I ended up having to change those out. So for me, I'm not so much a big fan of taking them off. Obviously, if you're a racer, you want them out of there because you don't want that weight. If you're that good a racer, you'll know that. But for your everyday, fan driver, you don't have to take them off. But by the way, if you end up putting the Alfaholics rear brakes on, or for that matter the other aluminum lightweight brakes like this, you're going to have to modify the dust backers in order for that thing to fit. When I used to change them out with a previous brand we used to use, we kind of blew the whole thing out on the backside and slipped them on, because taking that dust jacket off is not that easy. So anyway, then it the realization that you didn't need to do that. What you need is just a fairly decent die grinder, some tin snips, and just trim away what you need, and the thing will fit. Okay, so I have a really long screwdriver that the handle's actually under the rotor. It's kind of a nice way to go if you can find a number 3 Phillips long handled screwdriver. Assuming you don't have one, it's probably not a bad thing to have it. Obviously, because this is our profession, we have an arsenal of tools. So the ones that I use, the Snap-on ones, really do a good job. They have a nice little micro bite tip on them, and they don't slip out of the socket too easily. But again, it's not a necessary purchase, but you are definitely going to need a long number 3 Phillips screwdriver to accomplish this. Now, we already pulled the limiting strap off the other side. Okay, there, voila, down and away. Okay, so now I have no reason why this won't come down. Slowly lowering my bottle jack. Okay, lift up the rear end. The shocks have already been unbolted from trailing arms, so right now everything's ready to go. It's just that an easy a job. Okay, I do realize that we have the fortune of having a lift, so we can kind of do this somewhat easier than most of you trying to do something to this capacity at home. But once the limiting straps are removed, the rear end drops dramatically. It's not that dangerous of a situation at this point, because you still have the trunnion holding the upper half of the differential in place, and you have the drive line holding the front of it, so it's not like it's really going to go anywhere, not to mention it's still tied into the trailing arms. The springs are in an uncompressed state, so they're not going to hurt you. And so now we're going to pull them out. Now pulling them out is a pretty easy job. All you have to do is compress the shock a little bit. And that's it. Shock's compressed and spring comes right out. Just that simple. Now we'll do the other side. It turns out that our yellow springs are probably my best option. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some spacers that we're going to put on top of the spring inside the rubber isolator. And granted, I realize that most people don't have a lathe laying around that they can just go whip up some parts. But we find this lathe to be really, really valuable to our daily progress. You know, whether we use it to rebuild door hinges or make spring perch cups, you know, it's just something that we have. If you have some mechanical ability, I would encourage you to look around and try to buy one of these if you don't already. They're fairly cheap, and you know, the older ones from the 50s and 60s are still better than some of the cheaper imports that you can go get at your local cheap tool store. Okay, so we made our spacers. We put them in between the spring and the rubber isolator. I have seen and heard of people taking the rubber isolators out. I don't know that that's really a good idea. You're going to get a lot of vibration transmission back into the chassis of the car. That's going to take away from the positive experience of the drive. So whether you're lowering your car or you're just trying to adjust the stance to something that's a little more favorable for wheel clearance, I would recommend that you never pull the rubber isolators unless you're running a special spring and shock package that requires so. The irony of it is I'm using a more traditional spring and shock package, and quite honestly, there's probably no real reason why I should be doing this, because we have a relationship with Alfaholics, and Alfaholics has a really nice spring and shock package with an adjustable coilover in the rear. So all this battling I'm doing to find that ideal ride height in the rear of my car is just me being a glutton for punishment, because had I used that particular setup, and it's a very good one, this would have been done hours ago. Just food for thought. What dirty little secret did this car have? Is this piece something to do with it? We'll tell you more in the next episode.